Copper Creek held its breath as the sun bled out across the western horizon, staining the clouds the color of dried blood. Heat shimmered off the packed dirt street even though night was crawling close, and the dry wind carried the restless creak of saloon doors and the rattle of loose shutters. Horses stamped in their hitching posts, catching the smell of something unsettled in the air. Word had ridden faster than any horse. Jesse Crow was coming. Mothers yanked children inside, merchants barred their doors, and men who'd once boasted about their steady aim now gripped their rifles with sweaty palms. The sky darkened to the bruised purple of a storm that would never break. A lone rider appeared at the far end of the street, a black silhouette framed by the dying light. His hat brim cast his face in shadow, but the slow, confident sway of his shoulders told the town everything they feared. Jesse Crow reined in his charcoal stallion as though the whole world waited for him. Dust swirled around the horse's hooves like smoke rising from a fire that couldn't be put out. On the boardwalk outside the sheriff's office, Clara Hale watched him come. She had heard the whispers since dawn, the tales of banks emptied and posses outsmarted, the murmured warnings that this man left death in his wake. Yet what she saw was not a monster but a figure carved from the same wild stone as the desert itself, sun-scarred skin, a lean grace that spoke of miles traveled and nights slept beneath open skies. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Don't ever meet the eyes of a wolf unless you're ready to fight it, but she couldn't look away. Jesse slowed his horse in front of the saloon, the town's nervous heart. Lantern light spilled onto the street, catching the silver buckle at his belt and the worn leather of his coat. The gossipers and gamblers pressed their faces to the windows, their breath fogging the glass. Somewhere down the street a dog barked once and then went silent. The wind paused as if the desert itself waited for his next move. Sheriff Thomas Hale stepped off the boardwalk, his spurred boots striking the dirt like hammer blows. He was a broad-shouldered man who carried the weight of the badge as if it were a final promise to a dying world. His hand hovered near his holster, but his eyes flicked sideways to his daughter. Clara felt a warning in that glance. Stay back. Stay safe. Stay invisible. She stayed where she was, but her heartbeat matched the rhythm of the stallion's restless snort. Jesse dismounted in one fluid motion, the kind that made it seem he and the horse were part of the same living thing. He looped the reins over the post and lifted his head. When his eyes met Clara's, the noise of the world, the groan of hinges, the rustle of skirts, the muted prayers behind locked doors, fell away. They were the color of storm clouds over sun-baked stone, carrying a challenge and a question she had never known she wanted to answer. The outlaw took a slow step toward the sheriff, boots sinking slightly into the dust. "Evenin', Hale," he said, his voice low and rough, a voice that carried the weight of long roads and empty nights. Heard Copper Creek was a place where a man could find what he's looking for. Thomas Hale's hand twitched closer to the butt of his revolver. "What you'll find here is a rope if you make one wrong move." Jesse's mouth curved, not quite a smile. "Maybe I came for something else." Before anyone could blink, Clara stepped off the boardwalk. The sound of her boots in the dust was like the crack of a rifle in the tense silence. Gasps flared behind curtained windows. Her father called her name, but she kept moving until she stood a breath away from a stranger. She smelled the trail on him, horse sweat, gun oil, the dry sage of the open desert. Up close, Jesse's presence was a storm. Clara felt her own breath itch as his gaze searched hers, not demanding, just seeing. She thought of all the quiet nights when she had stood at her window, staring at the endless stretch of stars and wondering if the life mapped out for her was the only one she could live. He looked at her as if he already knew the answer. "You shouldn't," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe I should," he replied, soft enough that only she could hear. Then he leaned in. The kiss was sudden and slow all at once, a deliberate defiance that stole the air from a street. The world seemed to tilt, the lanterns flickered, the horses shied, the sky deepened to indigo. His lips were warm from the long ride, tasting of dust and the faint copper of danger. Clara's breath caught in a rush of heat and fear and something far older than either. For one heartbeat she forgot her father, the townspeople, the gallows whispering in every shadow. The town did not forget. A collective gasp swept through Copper Creek like the hiss of a fuse. Doors opened. Men spilled onto porches. The saloon's piano player stopped mid-note. The kiss broke, but the shock it left behind hung heavier than the coming night. Sheriff Hale's eyes burned beneath the brim of his hat. His hand gripped a revolver at his hip, leather creaking under the sudden strain. "Step away for her," he said, each word sharp as a drawn blade. Jesse straightened but didn't retreat. "No harm meant," he said, though the slow curl of his mouth suggested a different kind of truth. Clara's heart pounded so hard she thought it might betray every unspoken thought. The town was alive with whispers now, some scandalized, some thrilled, all hungry for what might follow. She felt every gaze like a weight on her skin, but she refused to step back. Her father moved first. The revolver cleared leather with a sound that cut through the murmuring crowd. The barrel glinted in the dying light as he leveled it at Jesse's chest. "You made your last mistake, Crow." Jesse's hand hovered near his own weapon, but he did not draw. "If that's the way you want it," he said quietly. His eyes never left Clara's, as if the bullet waiting between them belonged to her as much as him. The stallion stamped and snorted, sensing the tension. Somewhere in the distance a coyote howled, a lonely note that slid under the skin. The crowd held still, breathless, every soul caught between the crack of lightning and the roll of thunder that had yet to come. Clara stepped forward, heart hammering, knowing the next breath could break the night wide open. Night leaked away into a gray that felt more like ash than dawn. A low wind prowled the alleys of Copper Creek, carrying the metallic tang of a storm that hadn't yet broken. Jesse Crow was already behind iron bars when the first rooster crowed. They had taken him without a shot, the sheriff's men surrounding the boarding house before he could slip into the hills. He hadn't fought, hadn't even reached for the revolver at his hip. He simply lifted his hands and let them bind his wrists with rope as if it were all some quiet agreement. By the time the church bell tolled 6, the town square throbbed with uneasy purpose. Men hammered the last nails into the gallows, each strike echoing like a drumbeat in the heavy morning air. Children peered from behind their mothers' skirts, eyes wide as marbles. The smell of cut lumber mixed with the dampness of a sky swollen with rain. Copper Creek had waited years for a moment like this, a notorious outlaw broadlow, a spectacle to break the monotony of dust and drought. Clara Hale stood near the sheriff's office, her shawl pulled tight though the air was warm. She had barely slept, haunted by the memory of Jesse's eyes and the reckless press of his lips. She could still taste the grit of dust between them. Now she watched him through the barred window. He sat on the edge of the cot, wrists free but posture straight, as if he were merely resting before a long ride. No plea, no panic, just a quiet patience that unnerved everyone who dared glance inside. The whispers began as soon as the first curious onlookers gathered. Some swore he had robbed the Silver Spur Bank with a dozen men. Others claimed he'd shot a marshal in New Mexico and left him for buzzards. Yet for every tale of murder there was another of heroism. Jesse guiding wagon trains through Apache territory, Jesse pulling children from a flash flood, Jesse riding as a Union scout in the war. Clara heard the stories braid together into something almost mythical, like the wind weaving through canyon walls. None of it explained the calm she'd seen when the deputies shackled him, or the way he had looked at her as if nothing in the world could touch him. She drifted closer to the cell door. "Why don't you say something?" she asked softly, aware of the deputy loitering near the stairs. "They're ready to hang you before noon." Jesse lifted his head, the faintest smile tugging at his mouth. "Words won't change what they've already decided," he said. "And I've no wish to beg for a mercy they don't own. You can tell them who you are, what you've done, if half the stories are true. They won't hear it." He stood, coming to the bars until only a hand's breadth separated them. A rope can tighten around a man's neck, but not around the truth. Remember that. The sentence struck her like a bell, ringing deeper than sense. She wanted to ask what truth he meant, but her father ended just then, his badge glinting like cold fire. Sheriff Hale's jaw was set, his eyes refusing to meet hers. "It's time," he said, and 2 deputies moved to unbolt the door. Jesse stepped out without resistance. The morning had darkened, clouds boiling overhead, a bruised sky ready to break. Clara followed the slow procession into the square, the crowd parting around them like a tide of judgment. She caught fragments of gossip. "Killed a dozen men, they say. Scout turned thief. The devil's own son." Each rumor stung her ears, not because she believed them, but because she sensed how little truth mattered to those hungry for a hanging. The gallows loomed at the center of town, raw pine damp from the mist. The rope swung lightly in the breeze, a pale serpent waiting for its strike. Children clutched their mothers, men jostled for a better view. The preacher murmured a prayer no one listened to. Clara's stomach tightened as Jesse mounted the steps, his stride steady, the boards groaning beneath his weight. Sheriff Hale read the charges in a voice that carried across the square. Robbery, murder, treason, each word seemed to harden the air. Jesse stood with his hands bound once more, expression unreadable, eyes scanning the crowd as if he sought something beyond them all. When the sheriff finished, he asked if the prisoner had any last words. Jesse only shook his head. The murmuring swelled, a restless wave of disappointment and curiosity. Clara felt a sudden, fierce urge to scream that it was wrong, that they were blind. Instead, she searched the faces around her, desperate for a sign she wasn't alone in doubt. That was when she saw him. A figure slipped through the throng near the back of the crowd, half hidden by a wide-brimmed hat and a scarf drawn high across his face. His coat was dark, heavy despite the warm wind, and his movements carried a strange purpose. He passed within a few feet of her, never once lifting his gaze, and in that brief moment something brushed her hand. A scrap of folded paper, quick and silent as a snake in dry grass. Clara's breath caught. She palmed the note, heart hammering as the stranger melded back into the shifting sea of bodies. She turned, searching, but he was already gone, swallowed by dust and shadow. With trembling fingers she unfolded the paper. 3 short words scrawled in a harried hand stared up at her. Don't let them hang the wrong men. A chill swept through her, colder than the wind that began to rise as the first raindrops splattered against the gallows. The clouds above rumbled, low and ominous. Jesse lifted his face to the sky, the hint of a smile at the corner of his mouth, as if he too heard something in the gathering storm that no one else could hear. The storm broke after nightfall, a thin rain that hissed across Copper Creek and left the streets slick with mud and secrets. Clara waited until the lamps in her father's house burned low and the last patrol passed beneath her window. The note burned hotter than any fire in her palm, its 3 words a summons she could not ignore. She wrapped her shawl tight, tucked the paper into her bodice, and slipped into the dark. The town lay hushed beneath a low ceiling of clouds. Lantern light glimmered faintly in puddles, and the smell of wet earth mingled with the iron tang of distant lightning. She kept to the back alleys, heart pounding at every creak of a shutter, until she reached the stables. Her mare snorted softly as if sensing the urgency. Clara saddled her quickly, the leather damp and cold beneath her fingers, and rode east toward the black line of the hills. The canyon waited beyond the dry creek bed, a gash of stone that swallowed moonlight whole. The trail narrowed to a ribbon between jagged walls, and the wind funneled through like a whispering ghost. Clara guided the horse as far as the rocks allowed, then dismounted and pressed onward on foot, the wet gravel crunching beneath her boots. Somewhere deep inside, a faint glow pulsed, a lantern's heart flickering in the dark. She crouched behind a cluster of boulders, breath held, and peered into the mouth of the old silver vein mine. The opening yawned like a wound, faint yellow light licking its edges. Voices drifted out, low and sharp, carrying the cadence of men who trusted the night to guard them. Clara slipped closer, the slick rock cold against her palms as she edged along the wall until the tunnel opened before her. Inside, lanterns swung from rusty hooks, casting restless shadows over the timbers. The smell of damp earth and old ore thickened the air. Crates lay stacked near the entrance, their lids pried back to reveal canvas sacks glittering with flecks of gold. She recognized the seal burned into one crate, property of the Denver Pacific Line, robbed in a daring raid months ago. Her breath caught. Every tale of stolen shipments, every rumor of missing payrolls, the answers all glittered here beneath the abandoned hills. The men stood in a rough circle, 6 of them at least, their hats pulled low. At the center, speaking in a clipped, commanding tone, was a figure she knew too well. Deputy Marshal Wade Kincaid, the lawman who rode at her father's side for years, the men the town trusted as much as the sheriff himself, now leaning casually against a crate of stolen gold like it belonged to him. "We move before dawn," Kincaid said, his voice echoing against the stone. "The gallows give us cover. Everyone's eyes will be on Crow. By the time the rope snaps, we'll have the next shipment loaded and gone." A murmur of agreement rolled through the circle. Clara pressed closer, the rough timber biting her palms. "What about the girl?" one of the men asked, his words thick with unease. "Sheriff's daughter's been sniffing around. She was at the hanging this morning, too close to Crow." Kincaid's smile was a thin blade. "I've taken care of that. By midday she'll be just another mourner. And Crow, well, he'll never speak a word." The lantern flames wavered as if recoiling from the sound. Clara's stomach knotted. They meant to kill Jesse not for his crimes, but because he knew theirs. Her mind spun with the implication. If Kincaid commanded these men, how many others in town wore badges over rotten hearts? The thought of her father standing shoulder to shoulder with this traitor sent a cold current through her veins. She eased backward, careful not to send pebbles skittering across the floor. Thunder boomed outside, masking the scrape of her boots. Rain began to drip through cracks in the rock, each drop a slow clock marking the moments she had left. The horse whickered faintly somewhere beyond the mouth of the canyon, a warning she prayed the men wouldn't hear. "Remember," Kincaid said, his voice rising above the rumble of the storm. "Crow dies at sunrise, and Copper Creek stays blind. Anyone wavers, they join him at the rope." The men grunted assent, the sound like a single dark oath. Clara's pulse thudded against her throat. She crouched lower, every muscle taut, until the echoes of their voices blurred with the thunder. Lightning flared through a crack in the roof, painting the cavern in a brief, silver glare. In that instant she saw Kincaid's eyes catch the light, cold, calculating, certain. She retreated inch by inch until the chill night air wrapped her once more. The canyon exhaled damp wind, carrying the scent of rain and gunpowder. Behind her the men's plans continued, their words swallowed by the stone. Ahead lay a narrow trail slick with water, treacherous as any enemy. Clara gripped the note hidden in her bodice, its message now heavy as a loaded pistol. The stranger's warning had been true. And if she failed to act before sunrise, Jesse Crow would swing from the gallows while the real killer rode free. A sudden clang of metal rang out from deep in the mine, sharper than thunder. Clara froze. Voices hushed. Boots scraped stone. Lantern light surged brighter for an instant as someone moved toward the entrance. She pressed against the canyon wall, breath shallow, praying the darkness would keep her secret. A shadow stretched across the wet gravel, wrong and searching. She could hear the man's slow, deliberate steps, the faint jingle of spurs. Lightning flashed again, revealing the outline of a rifle cradled in his arms. The air tasted of iron and fear. Then, just as quickly, the shadow receded. The echo of boots faded back into the cavern. A coarse laugh followed, muffled by stone. "Just the wind," someone said. Clara waited until the sound of plodding resumed, then slipped into the rain-drenched night. Her mare nickered softly as she swung into the saddle, and together they vanished into the storm, the canyon's dark secret roaring in her ears like the thunder that chased her home. Rain hammered Copper Creek through the black hours before dawn, washing dust from the roofs and turning the main street into a ribbon of mud. Clara rode hard through the storm, her mare's hooves throwing up spray, the canyon's revelations pounding in her chest like a second heart. Lanterns glowed faintly in the sheriff's office when she burst through the door, soaked to the bone and shaking from more than cold. Sheriff Thomas Hale looked up from his desk, startled by the sudden slam. His gray eyes, always steady, sharpened with worry when he saw her drenched and wild-eyed. "Clara, Lord above, where've you?" "There's no time," she cut in, voice cracking. "It isn't Jesse. The gold shipments, the robberies, Kincaid is behind them. I heard it myself in the Silver Vein mine. He and his men planned to kill Jesse at sunrise and make the town think justice was served." For a heartbeat the room was silent but for the rain drumming the windows. Her father straightened slowly, the leather of his chair creaking like old bone. "You're certain?" "I saw the stolen gold," she said. "Denver Pacific seals. I heard Kincaid give the order." His jaw worked as if the words tasted bitter. He turned away, staring at the tin star nailed to the wall. "That's a grave charge," he murmured. "It's the truth," she insisted. "We have to stop the hanging. We have to stop Kincaid." He rubbed a hand over his face, fingers tracing the pale scar that cut from temple to jaw. A scar Clara had never asked about and he had never explained. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of years. "You don't know what you're asking. I'm asking you to save an innocent man." He moved to the window, the stormlight etching his profile. "When I was young," he said quietly, "I rode beside Jesse Crow. Before the war ended, we scouted for the Union through country where every shadow held a rifle. He saved my life more times than I can count." Clara blinked, stunned. "You knew him?" "I knew a man with steady hands and a sharp mind. But after the war he disappeared into the territories, and I buried that chapter. Folks need a sheriff who wears the law clean, not one tied to old ghosts." She stepped closer, her heart aching at the weariness in his shoulders. "Then you know he doesn't deserve this." "I know duty," he said, turning to face her. "And duty means I stand by the badge, no matter who wears it." A gust of wind rattled the windows like an omen. Clara's voice softened but did not waver. "Justice isn't a badge," she said. "It's a choice made in the dark." The words hung between them, heavier than thunder. Outside, the storm deepened, lightning clawing the sky. He looked at her then, truly looked, as if seeing the child who once rode on his shoulders and the woman who now challenged him. "You have your mother's fire," he said, almost to himself. A sudden crash from the porch snapped the moment. The door flew open and Deputy Marshal Kincaid strode in, rain dripping from his hat, a smile coiled like a rattler. Two armed men flanked him, their eyes hard and eager. "Well now," Kincaid drawled, wiping water from his coat. "What's all this midnight chatter?" Sheriff Hale's hand drifted toward his revolver, but he kept his voice even. "You're out late, Wade." "Keeping the peace," Kincaid said. His gaze slid to Clara, and the corner of his mouth twitched. "Funny thing, Sheriff. Word reached me that your daughter was seen riding east in this storm. Folks might wonder what business she's got out by the old mines." Clara's breath caught. She saw the flicker of recognition in his eyes. He knew. "I go where I please," she said, forcing her chin high. Kincaid stepped closer, spurs clicking. "That's so. Or maybe you go where an outlaw tells you. Maybe you're helping him plot an escape." "That's a lie," she snapped. "Is it?" He nodded to his men, and they spread to either side, blocking the door. "Aiding an outlaw's a serious offense, miss. Can't have the sheriff's kin undermining the law." Sheriff Hale stiffened. "You watch your words, Wade." But Kincaid's grin only sharpened. "Law's clear. She rides with Crow's allies. She spends the night in a cell. Ain't personal, it's procedure." Clara felt her father's tension like a drawn bowstring. His hand hovered over his revolver, eyes locked on the deputy he had trusted for years. The storm outside roared as if urging a decision. She laid a hand on his arm, a silent plea not to draw. "It's all right, Pa," she said quietly. "Let him take me." His eyes met hers, a thousand memories flickering there. Her first steps, her mother's smile, every silent promise he'd ever made. The struggle inside him was plain as day, duty warring with blood. Kincaid gestured, and one of his men stepped forward with iron cuffs. "Smart girl," he said. "We'll sort this out come morning." Sheriff Hale's jaw clenched until the scar along his cheek stood white. He said nothing as they bound Clara's wrists. Rain gusted through the open door, carrying the cold smell of the approaching dawn. As Kincaid led her out, Clara caught a last glimpse of her father, standing rigid in the flickering lantern light, the badge on his chest gleaming like a question with no easy answer. Lightning ripped the sky wide open, a jagged white vein that lit Copper Creek like a photograph burned into memory. The storm howled through the streets, driving sheets of rain sideways against the jailhouse walls. Clara shivered in the dark cell, wrists rubbed raw from the iron cuffs, listening to the thunder that seemed to creep closer with every heartbeat. Jesse sat on the cot across from her, calm as ever, eyes fixed on the barred window where the night flickered with silver light. "You feel it?" he asked quietly. She nodded, though she wasn't sure what he meant, the storm, the danger, or the strange certainty that something was about to break. Bootsteps pounded the boardwalk outside. Sheriff Hale appeared, soaked to the skin, lantern clutched in a white-knuckled grip. His face was carved from worry and resolve. Without a word he unlocked the door and stepped inside, water dripping from the brim of his hat. "Get up," he said to Jesse. Clara rose too, hope flashing through her chest. "Pa." "Not a word," he cut in, his voice low but urgent. "Kincaid's coming with every rattlesnake he commands. They mean to finish what they started." Jesse stood slowly, studying the sheriff with a soldier's eye. "You're sure?" "I've seen their signal fires beyond the ridge. We've minutes, maybe less." He tossed Jesse a worn revolver. "I never doubted your aim." Jesse checked the cylinder with a practiced flick. "Then we hold this ground." Outside, a sudden crack of gunfire split the storm. Horses screamed in terror. Lanterns shattered under the first volley, plunging the street into a strobing chaos of lightning and shadow. The gang poured in like floodwater, dark figures rushing through rain, muzzles sparking. Sheriff Hale kicked the door shut and threw the bolt. "We make our stand here," he said. Jesse's eyes scanned the room, mapping every angle. "Two rifles by the desk," he said. "Windows give us high cover. Clara, stay low and feed us rounds." The sheriff handed her a box of cartridges without hesitation. "Do as he says." The first outlaw burst through a side window, glass exploding across the floor. Jesse fired once, a quiet precision that belied the storm outside. The moon dropped without a cry. "A true shot needs no sunlight," he murmured, already turning to the next target. Thunder rolled like cannon fire. Clara scrambled across the floor, sliding cartridges to her father, heart pounding as bullets slammed into the walls. Jesse moved with the ease of a man born to war, each motion spare and deliberate. He called out positions, counted breaths between shots, and the attackers fell back, confused by the invisible hunter in the dark. But the gang regrouped, circling like wolves. Flames flared as someone hurled a torch onto the porch. The wooden steps ignited, smoke snaking under the door. Rain hissed against fire, the battle of elements echoing the clash of men. "We can't hold forever," Clara gasped. Jesse's glance was quick and calm. "We don't have to. We just need to cut the head off the snake." As if summoned, a voice rose above the storm, a harsh bark of orders. Kincaid. His silhouette loomed in the lightning, directing men toward the gallows where Jesse had stood hours earlier. The rope swayed in the wet wind like a pale specter, waiting. "They want me on that platform," Jesse said. "Let's oblige." Sheriff Hale met his gaze, something unspoken passing between them, old trust forged in darker times. He unbolted the back door. "I'll cover you." Rain swallowed them the moment they stepped into the alley. The world was a blur of silver rain and muzzle flashes. Clara followed, clutching her father's spare rifle, teeth chattering from cold and fear. They darted through shadows, Jesse guiding them with hand signals sharp as military code. The gallows loomed at the center of the square, its ladder slick with rain. Kincaid stood atop it, lantern in one hand, pistol in the other, shouting for his men to hold the line. Lightning lit his face, eyes wild, smile crooked with arrogance. Around him the gang formed a ragged circle, but their focus was fractured by the relentless storm and the quiet marksmen picking them off one by one. Jesse moved first, slipping between barrels and crates with a ghost certainty. Each shot he fired found its mark, forcing the outlaws back step by step. Sheriff Hale covered the flanks, his own revolver barking in counterpaint. Clara knelt behind a rain barrel, reloading with shaking hands, the acrid scent of powder burning her lungs. The last of Kincaid's men fell back toward the stables, leaving their leader alone on the platform. Jesse mounted the steps, boots ringing against wetwood. Kincaid turned, lantern swinging wildly, the rope behind him twisting in the wind. "Well, well," Kincaid sneered, his voice cutting through the storm. "The dead man walks." Jesse leveled his revolver, rain streaming from the barrel. "End of the trail, Wade." Kincaid's smile sharpened. "Not yet." He moved with sudden speed, drawing and firing in one motion. The shot sang past Jesse's ear, splintering the beam beside him. Jesse dropped to a crouch, returning fire, but Kincaid ducked behind the lantern post, the rope swaying like a living thing between them. Sheriff Hale charged forward through the downpour, but a stray bullet forced him back. Clara held her breath as lightning split the sky again, freezing the scene in stark white, the outlaw and the traitor, face to face on the gallows meant for another man, the storm itself seeming to pause for the shot that would decide everything. The storm broke at last into a cold gray hush, the clouds thinning until the first fragile light of morning bled across the desert. Rainwater pooled in the roots of Copper Creek's Main Street, reflecting a sky streaked with pale rose and iron. The gallows stood slick with rain, rope dangling like a forgotten threat. Smoke from spent gunpowder drifted in the damp air, carrying the scent of burnt wood and final reckonings. Jesse Crow faced Wade Kincaid on the platform, both men drenched and breathless, steam rising from their coats in the chill. The crowd that had once clamored for a hanging now stood frozen, eyes wide, unsure whether to cheer or pray. Sheriff Hale kept his revolver trained on the remaining outlaws who lingered at the edges of the square, their bravado drowned by the storm and Jesse's unerring aim. Kincaid wiped rain from his face with the back of his hand, his grin stretched thin. "You should have stayed in that cell, Crow. Would have been cleaner." His pistol gleamed dully in the dawn light. Jesse's revolver never wavered. Clean's a word you never understood. The wind tugged at the swaying rope, a faint creak that seemed to measure the seconds. Clara stood at the base of the platform, every muscle tight, her breath caught between hope and terror. She watched Jesse's eyes, steady, unblinking, as if he could see the bullet's path before it existed. Kincaid lunged sideways, gun rising. The crack of thunder and the flash of Jesse's shot came as one, a single fierce heartbeat. Kincaid staggered, eyes wide with disbelief, and crumpled to the slick boards. His pistol skittered across the platform and dropped into the mud below. Silence claimed the square. Even the morning birds withheld their song. Then the sheriff stepped forward, voice carrying over the gathered townsfolk. "It's finished," he said. Wade Kincaid was the thief, the killer, The men who poisoned this town. Jesse Crow stands innocent. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Relief, shame, wonder. Men lowered their rifles, women clutched their children, and the tension that had held Copper Creek in its grip eased like a long-held breath. Clara felt the weight lift from her chest, replaced by a trembling gratitude that left her weak-kneed. Jesse descended the ladder slowly, rainwater dripping from the brim of his hat. Sheriff Hale met him at the bottom. For a moment the two men stood together, soldiers of a war long ended yet bound again by its unspoken code. Hale extended his hand. Jesse clasped it firmly, the gesture carrying more than words could hold. They came to watch a hanging, the sheriff said quietly, but they'll leave speaking of a man reborn. Jesse's mouth curved in the faintest smile. Let's hope the story stays true. Clara stepped closer, the mud sucking at her boots. She met Jesse's gaze and saw in it not the outlaw of rumor, nor the killer the town had feared, but a man tempered by roads too long and losses too deep. He looked at her as if acknowledging the risk she had taken, the faith she had placed where no one else dared. You saved me, he said simply. You saved yourself, she replied. I just followed the truth. They stood together in the pale dawn, rain easing to a mist, the square around them already stirring as townsfolk whispered of the night's revelations. There was no promise between them, no careless vow. Only a quiet understanding that some connections run deeper than words, forged in danger and sealed by the choice to stand when it mattered. Jesse glanced toward the horizon where the storm clouds retreated like beaten armies. I should ride before the law gets confused again. Sheriff Hale nodded once. You'll have a head start. And my thanks. Clara wanted to ask him to stay, to build something out of the strange fire they had shared, but she knew the road called him like a tide. She only said, wherever you go, they'll remember. He tipped his hat, eyes lingering on hers, and then mounted his stallion with the easy grace of a man born to the saddle. The horse pawed the wet ground, eager for open country. Jesse gave the town one last look, at the gallows that would never claim him, at the people who would carry his name and story, and then turned toward the empty horizon. The sun finally broke over the desert, spilling gold across the rain-soaked earth. Clara watched until rider and horse were nothing more than a dark silhouette against the blaze of morning, a legend already dissolving into distance. Years later, travelers passing through Copper Creek would hear the tale. They'd stop at the saloon and lean close as the old-timers spoke of the outlaw who kissed the sheriff's daughter before the hangman's rope could tighten, of the night a town awoke to its own corruption, of a bullet fired in the hush of dawn that set a crooked world straight. And each retelling carried the same final line, whisper with a kind of reverence. They came to watch a hanging. They left speaking of a man reborn.